A war. One like Earth had never seen before. Millions lost, even more displaced. The enemy was like nothing we had ever seen before. They came from far beyond anywhere we had ever been, and with them came the destruction of the world we once knew. My name is Alara. I was a teenager when they came. I lived in one of the colonies closest to Earth in relative comfort. My family had been wealthier than most, my father being the colony manager for the main space shipping company of Earth and her colonies. Before the invasion, or rather attempted extermination, I had spent my days in school, being groomed to one day take over my father's mantle in the company. By night I would throw up my long chocolate brown hair into a variety of different and elaborate hairstyles, my luscious locks being the envy of all those who knew me or even saw me, to go out and party in the city that I lived in. When worn down and hanging in my natural loose waves, my hair reached my thin but toned waistline. Even after we evacuated to Earth, I had carefully cared for my beautiful hair, doing everything I could to treat it right. My father's company had a compound where colonial executives and their families could live while hiding out from the invaders on Earth as we hid ourselves while we did our best to fight back. Life was nowhere near as luxurious as I was used to on my home planet, but the company did a good job taking care of us. I made friends and finished school. But then things got worse. The Earth's military had been nearly wiped out and soldiers were needed. A draft was instituted and anyone over 18 was eligible, male or female. Not everyone was being taken, but the selection seemed to be completely random. Some suspected that those chosen were selected because they matched the physical, mental, and emotional standards for the space forces. Only the best and brightest were good enough to be sent off to fight. Boot camp, placement, and ultimately military service was what their future held. And with boot camp came the horrid haircuts. I never considered myself to be worthy of that, and so when I reached my 18th birthday, I was in no way concerned. I celebrated that day with a cake which had been cleverly made using ingredients that were not currently being rationed. It was good but not great. My parents then surprised me with a salon visit. My hair would go through a deep conditioning treatment, a trim, and a blowout. Then a night of partying and fun. The next morning though, the fun ended. At my doorstep were a man and woman from the Department of Interplanetary Defense. Both wore grim expressions, sharp uniforms, and different varieties of shorn haircuts. With them were my draft papers. Report to the recruit depot at 0800 Friday morning. You have been selected for military service. Thank you for your service, had been all they simply said. I cried that night, as did my parents, and as did my friends. As a girl, I was unlikely to be selected for a combat role and would most likely find myself in some kind of support role. But the minimum term of service was 4 years. I would be 22 when I returned home. It was a Wednesday when they told me to report on Friday. The rest of Wednesday and all of Thursday, my family and I did the best we could to enjoy our time, but the looming life-altering change kept nervousness tight in our chests. Thursday night before I went to sleep, I began to braid my hair into the French braided pigtails I always slept in. I began to sob as I handled my long hair for the last time. In boot camp, my hair would be changed. And it would probably never be the same again. The standard for men was a smooth-shaved head through all of boot camp, which could then be grown out as long as no hair was longer than 2 inches and the sides were shaved short. Women received a chin-length bob with an undercut all the way up to the edges of the crown that was buzzed with clippers that had no guard. The standard military helmet was required to be fit around the ears and the occipital bone, and hair caused interference, so the sides and nape had to remain shaved. Women were allowed to grow the hair on their crown long but had to keep it up in a severe bun while on duty. Another disappointing aspect was that, to rob the recruits of their individuality, a chemical was used to permanently change their hair color to black so each would look almost identical from behind. These requirements had not been an issue when the military was made up of volunteers, but now that the majority of recruits were conscripted, many resented the interplanetary government for robbing so many of their individual appearances. I held my braids as I cried myself to sleep. In the morning, my life would be over, and my beautiful, carefully maintained brown locks would be forever changed. I couldn't believe all of this was happening to me. At some point in my sobbing, I drifted off to sleep. Alarm blaring, I snapped awake. I looked down and checked the time. Somehow I had overslept and would cut it dangerously close to being late. Unable to style my hair for one last time, I ran downstairs as I pulled on simple workout clothes. After a hasty but tear-filled goodbye to my family, I dashed out the door to the recruit depot. Running up I saw a couple dozen other recruits, some hugging parents and other loved ones. I saw a boy and girl around my age kissing a long, passionate kiss before separating. The girl, a beautiful young woman with long red hair and a splash of freckles across her face, turned and joined me as I took my place in line. Nervously we shifted our weight, wringing our hands as we waited in line. At the front of the lines were intimidating-looking intake soldiers, handing each recruit a new set of plain-looking workout clothes and directing them into the building. "I'm Lex," the red-haired girl said, offering me a hand for a polite handshake. I took it and gave it a light squeeze. "Alara, we're going to be okay, right?" she asked, seeking comfort where she could find it. "Sure, probably dash," I said, as we got closer to the front. "Take your PT gear, move into the correction chambers," a gruff man with a black baseball cap bellowed as recruits moved by. "Correction chambers? What are they correcting? We haven't done anything wrong," Lex said, nervously running her fingers through her long hair. I looked at the nervous girl. Black hair would look fairly normal on me, but with her ginger's complexion, she would likely look very strange. Anxiously I thumbed the end of one of my long, chocolatey brown braids. I wasn't ready to lose my hair, but I had the suspicion that the thing that was going to be corrected was our appearance. Reaching the front of the line, I was handed a black sports bra, an unflattering pair of gray boxer briefs, gray tennis shoes, and a pair of white, mid-calf height socks. How they predicted my size, I had no idea. I was also disappointed to find that there was no shirt and there were no pants or shorts of any kind. I hesitated for a moment and was pushed along by a female soldier, her undercut showing no signs of stubble, who got close to my face and bellowed, "Move." Inside, I found my new friend, Lex, who held her new clothes as well. We looked at one another nervously as we were forced into a large room. In there everyone, male or female, was ordered to strip down and change. There were receptacles on the sides to put our old belongings. We were to bring nothing along but what had been issued to us. In the chaos of the moment, I was unbothered by the fact that I undressed fully to the nude in a room full of other people. I fully stripped down before pulling on the underwear and bra. They were at least comfortable. Sitting on the ground, I pulled on the socks and shoes. Lacing up the shoes, I saw that Lex was also ready, and the two of us took our old belongings to the barrels that were rapidly filling with clothes, shoes, comm phones, and other loose belongings. I left the hair ties in my braids, assuming they would want my hair well managed for whatever came next. Next we were ushered to a table that had wipes to remove any cosmetics or deodorant. I had no makeup as I had been forced to rush out the door, but I did pause to wipe away the deodorant from under my arms. Why they wanted that made no sense to me as I was herded along like an animal. "Can you believe they had us stripped down around boys?" Lex asked quietly as we jogged down a corridor. "No, but if they did that, I can't imagine we'll be getting much privacy for the next 4 years," I said, holding my arms around myself to fight against the cold of the air-conditioned building. My nipples were hard beneath my thin sports bra and I was sure they could be seen, but I figured if mine were, so were everybody else's. A quick peek at Lex's chest revealed my thoughts to be true. The red-haired girl's face was a mask of concern as we finally reached a line and we're forced to wait. "Do you think these are the correction chambers?" Lex asked me, scanning those ahead of us and looking at the doors that swiftly closed behind those who entered them. "They have to be. Any guesses for what they correct?" I asked, hoping to get any length of time before my hair was forever changed. "Your differences," I heard a voice say from behind me. I turned around to see a tall boy, around my age, perhaps a year older. He was fit, athletic, and admittedly attractive. The strong boy also looked serious. His head was already shaved smooth as if he wanted to just bypass whatever annoyances that lay in store for the rest of us recruits. Like the rest of the male recruits, he was shirtless in a pair of gray boxer briefs just like mine and wore matching socks and tennis shoes. I also noticed the impressive bulge that his tight underwear did little to conceal. "Our differences?" Lex asked, holding the ends of her beautiful red locks in her hands. "That's right, princess. Your hair. And anything else about you that isn't uniform. Blemishes, beauty marks, tattoos, piercings, whatever. Anything that would differentiate you from any of your fellow soldiers." At least they let us keep our natural eye colors and stay the genders we came in as, he said, first seriously and then finishing with a wink and smirk after his last statement. Lex began to cry silently, holding her hair. I looked up at the serious young man who stood behind me. Sizing him up, I guessed he came from a military pedigree and that he had volunteered to be here. He knew far too much about the process to have just been a draftee who learned his fate 2 days ago. How do you know so much? I asked him, squinting my gray-blue eyes up at him. He was nearly a head taller than me. I'm a Navy brat. My dad is a ship captain. Once I'm done with boot camp, I go straight into special operations. I was born for this, he said, his square jaw set. Well, Mr. Navy brat, it's nice to meet you. I'm Alara, I said, offering him a hand, doing everything I can to distract myself from the horrifying thing that rapidly approached. Mr. Navy brat smirked. Alara, nice to meet you. I'll see you on the other side. You'll look pretty different then, so I won't get used to this. He looked me up and down. Oh, and the name is Jane, he said before looking back to the front. Alara, I heard Lex say meekly. I looked at her and then to the front and saw that there was nobody in front of me, only an open door to a correction chamber. Tears began to well up in my eyes. Then another door opened, one for Lex. As I went through my door, I looked back at her one last time. She was shaking in silent sobs as she walked forward. Behind her, Jane gave me a reassuring smile and nodded his bald head. I gave an uncertain, teary-eyed smile in return and then closed the door to my chamber. Please step inside the circle at the center of the room, a pleasant feminine robotic voice said. In the middle of the room, a beam of white light came down from the ceiling, illuminating a red circle. I gulped and said I walked to it. Standing in the center, I squinted up at the bright light. Please stand by while your correction begins, the voice instructed. Machines began to whir around me. In front of me, scanners shined red lights on me, going up and down on my front and back. I stood, arms hanging at my sides, grazing my feminine hips. Scan complete. Beginning corrections, the voice stated. Several robotic arms reached down from the ceiling and pointed these things that looked like guns at me. Behind me I felt a burning sting on my back shoulder. Ow! I yelped in protest, flinching away from the pain. Blemishes are being removed. There may be mild discomfort. Please stay still, the voice ordered. I then realized the little mole on my shoulder, something my mother had always found so adorable, was now gone. As I stood there, I felt several other burning stings, each just as painful as the first. Across my whole body, freckles, scars, and even acne were being removed from my body. A lifetime of memories were being removed from my body. Body correction complete. Beginning hair now, the voice said. Tears began to fall down my cheeks as what felt like a bucket came down over my head and shoulders. Inside the bucket it was dark and I felt claws begin to grab at my hair. They worked their way down the lengths of my braids. Error, 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 I heard the voice say, echoing inside my bucket. Something grabbed my shoulders and held me in place. I felt my hair being pulled, something tugging at my braids. Unregistered objects detected. Engaging default settings, the machine said. Unregistered objects? I remembered my hair ties. They had said to remove everything, but I thought the hair ties would be okay. Panicked, my mind began to race at the thought of what the default settings were. I felt my hair being pulled outward and heard a loud buzzing sound within the mechanical bucket. Suddenly, over the top of my head I felt something pass over, buzzing as it went. After it passed, I felt a cool breeze. Again and again, I felt the same sensation and then cool air. Then I realized what was happening. Default settings must have been the male settings. My head was being shaved bald. I wouldn't even have the undercut like all of the female recruits. I would be smoothly shaved and bald for the next several weeks during boot camp. Wait, I'm a girl? Please don't do this, I begged the merciless machine as I felt more hair being removed by the second. The machine paid no attention to my pleas as I felt the hair now being removed from the sides of my head. If that was happening, I knew the top of my head had already been shaved. I was already going to be bald. And it appeared as though once the machine started, it could not be stopped. The buzzing sound stopped, just as I had finally accepted my fate. I hoped that maybe it wouldn't use the chemical to keep my hair from growing during the 8-week-long boot camp and that the drill instructors would realize the mistake and let me begin growing out my hair to match the other women. My hair had never grown particularly fast, so I knew I had a long road ahead of me. At least I had a lot to distract me. Then I felt a warm gel wash over my bald head. Initially I believed it was the chemical until I was warned by the machine. Remain still, razor shave in progress. Something cool and sharp touched my head and I felt it drag back on my hair, making a weird scraping sound. It felt like whatever minuscule amount of hair was left was fighting back against the blades of the razors that shaved my head smooth. The razors made pass after pass until I felt no resistance, just the feeling of something passing over a glassy smooth surface. I could tell that I was now fully bald. Then came the final step. The chemical treatment. My head would be bald for most of boot camp, with it only growing enough for me to have some variation of a military haircut for graduation. I felt the cold foam being sprayed on my naked scalp. Inside the bucket, I had no idea what I looked like, but I had the feeling it wasn't good. I'd never had my hair any shorter than collarbone length. Even as a baby I had been born with thick hair and there was never any doubt I was a girl because of how quickly it grew long and thick. With the effects of the chemical treatment I expected it to last longer, but within seconds, it began to burn. The burning did not last long though, as something that felt suspiciously like a head-shaped squeegee wiped the foam from my head. Then a wet cloth was dragged across my head. Hair correction complete. There will be a mirror available to see yourself if you choose, the voice said as the bucket raised into the ceiling. The lights in the room were activated as the bucket was removed from my head. I closed my eyes to the bright lights and held up my hand to shield my eyes. Slowly my eyes adjusted and I opened them. In front of me, the entire wall was a mirror. What looked back at me did not look like me at all. Just as I had expected, my hair was completely and totally gone. I still had my eyebrows and eyelashes, and thank God for that, because I think I would have looked sick without them. My head was shockingly pale and there were no traces of hair on it. Surprisingly, I felt myself starting to grow wet in my crotch. My neck looked long, slender, and feminine without hair covering it up. The delicate features of my face were only more prominent, making what had been just a pretty face now a stunningly beautiful one. My ears seemed to stick out a little more than I would have preferred, but even that didn't bother me much. Shockingly, I looked good. Really good. Reaching a hand up to feel what my new look felt like, I gently placed my fingers on my smooth head. The chemical treatment had clearly worked well because it felt like my scalp was completely smooth. It actually shined in the light of the correction chamber. I began to rub it more now, my other hand reaching down to my clit, my arousal building to a level I had never experienced before at the sight of my new appearance. I rubbed both my head and clit simultaneously, building to what would have been a soul-shattering climax when I was interrupted by the robotic voice. Correction complete, please exit the chamber, the voice said in a monotone. Looking at myself now more clearly after the fog of my arousal, my whole head flushed red. On my gray boxer briefs, I saw a wet spot. I had gotten so soaking wet from my self-pleasure that it had actually soaked my underwear that was my only covering. As soon as I stepped out the door that swung open for the next stage of intake, everybody would know what had happened to me. Please exit the chamber. Please exit the chamber, the voice began to repeat as I heard the entry door begin to open. Trying my best to discreetly cover my crotch with my hands, I hurried out of the room, afraid to get into trouble on my first day. With my concern over the dark spot on my underwear, I had nearly forgotten about my naked head. That is until I emerged and heard a voice I had just come to know. Oh my God, Alara? Are you bald? Lex asked, shocked as we entered a room full of other recruits. I reached my hand up to touch my naked scalp as I turned around, tears returning to my eyes from the embarrassment. The machine said something about an error because I had my hair tied in, I said shamefully. Lex looked like a completely different person from the last time I saw her, mere seconds before. All of her freckles and any natural redness was gone, replaced by flawless skin. Her hair, which had been a fiery natural red, was now black as the night. The sides and back had been reduced down to stubble while the top hung down to her chin. If it hadn't been for the shaved sections being revealed when she moved her head, it would have looked like a normal bob haircut. Trying to distract her from my shame, I stepped toward her and reached my hand up to her newly shorn hair. Oh my God, your poor hair. Yeah, it's bad, but now I'm glad I at least have some. Should we talk to a drill instructor and see if they can fix something? Lex asked, touching my bare head. What can they do? Glue it back on? Jane asked with a smirk. He had finished quickly considering he was already perfect by military standards. I bowed my bare head in shame as Lex pulled me in for a hug. He's right, they can't change anything. What's done is done. Hopefully they won't mistake me for a boy. That's unlikely considering your figure. Even if you are bald just like me, Jane said, guiding us to follow instructions. Suddenly I caught him looking down at my damp groin. Did you enjoy yourself there? He asked me in a soft whisper. What? No, I started to babble. It's okay, I'm the same way. I love your new look, see, he said, discreetly gesturing at his crotch. What I saw shocked me. His already massive bulge had turned into an even larger erection. He must have really liked my bald head. I was glad to find someone who understood me in this scary time. And I was glad to have found friends. I felt him reach up and feel my bald head, feigning a casual rub. We approached the group and were immediately screamed at to take our places in formation. Looks like we've got a baldy, a female drill instructor with a perfectly tied up top bun screamed. Can't follow instructions, Habaldi, another female drill instructor bellowed into my face. I stuttered nervously. Begin each of your statements with this recruit Baldy, the first drill instructor shouted into my exposed ear. This recruit I started before being interrupted by the second drill instructor who wore a wicked grin. Actually, you will refer to yourself as this Baldy so you can be reminded of your fuck up when you can't see your stupid bald head. And you better show me how loud you can scream when you address me, she screamed. This Baldy made a mistake. It won't happen again, ma'am. I shouted as loudly as I could. It better not, Baldy, or this will be a long boot camp for you, the first drill instructor bellowed as she moved on down the line. The second drill instructor left going the other direction. I stood there at attention, my bald head gleaming in the artificial light of the room. We were given an introduction by the man who would be our boot camp commanding officer. Then we were sworn in and shuffled off. Luckily, Jane and Lex were alongside me. 2 months later, I stood at the head of my class of recruits during our graduation, flanked by my 2 best friends, Jane and Lex. We had been through a lot together and had graduated at the top of our class. Jane and I tied for first, Lex achieving second place. We stood at attention for the ceremony, wearing our official dress uniforms. Following graduation, each of the new soldiers would be shipped off for their assignments. Jane was headed to special operations and, thanks to our successes in boot camp, so would Lex and me. As we presented our class flag, we were saluted as soldiers, no longer recruits. And I was no longer bald. Under my dress hat, I had hair again. It was neatly shaved into a perfect horseshoe-style flat top, complete with a perfect landing strip. I matched Jane who, after the events of the previous 8 weeks, I had grown to have a romantic connection with. We had our first date planned for the afternoon when we would be given a break. Lex and her undercut Bob would give us the space for our lunch date and then would meet up with us for a night on the town to celebrate. I, no longer Baldy, but now a soldier, was ready for what the world would throw at me. And I planned to never grow my hair out king again. Now, as the captain of my own company of elite soldiers, I've grown it to the maximum 2 inches for male standards. Lex, a staff officer under my command, has copied me, as has nearly every other female under my command. Jane, my second in command and new husband, has, at my request, returned to the smoothly shaved head that I love on him. The war isn't over, but it's being won thanks to people like us. And to think, this all started with a couple of bald heads. Okay, so we just have to divvy up the personal property, and then we're done. Lily's lawyer, Marjorie, said to her client, as she looked through the latest draft of Lily's divorce papers. That part is going to be tough, Lily said, running a hand through her thick brown hair. We've been together since college. You can accumulate a lot of stuff over 25 years, and it gets hard figuring out what belongs to whom. Well, I think it's safe to say we'll only be looking at the big-ticket items: cars, furniture, artwork, appliances, that sort of thing. Sometimes people get really possessive over things like their kitchen knives or their bath towels, but this usually goes smoothly. I don't know, Marjorie. Bill gets weirdly sentimental about the strangest things. I can't help but feel that there's going to be something he should have no business needing, but that he's going to want it because of some emotional attachment. Lily pulled her hair over her shoulder and began to pet it, like a security blanket. She continued, I remember this one time when I tried to give away an old dress that I'd gotten from one of those cheap boardwalk stores because I'd left my bathing suit cover-up at home. I just picked out the first one that I saw that wasn't hideously ugly, and Bill paid for it because he was also buying some dumb t-shirt. Bill saw that I had put the dress on the donate pile when we were doing spring cleaning a few years later, and he got so upset. But I bought you that. It was a gift from me. You wore it to the beach every day of that vacation. And it was such a special vacation. It's when you told me we were having Charlie. Anyway, I told him I wasn't going to wear it again and it was useless just hanging in my closet, and he insisted that he'd keep it, for sentimental reasons. That wasn't the first or last time he did something like that. I have no idea where he kept all of the crap he saved over the years. Well, the good news is, the more he takes, the less you have to worry about moving to the next place. Right. Marjorie jokes. Yes, but I'm worried that now that we're splitting up, some of those sentimental things will be stuff that actually has value to me, but he doesn't want to be separated from, or that he just doesn't want me to have. Marjorie had known Lily for more than a decade, and while she'd only met Bill a handful of times at parties, she had no idea he was so sentimental, or that he seemed willing to weaponize his sentimentality in order to get what he wanted. I'm sure it will be fine, she told Lily. She hoped she was right. It hadn't been easy for Lily to decide to ask Bill for a divorce. They had been together for so long, their lives were so intertwined. But she couldn't ignore the feelings she was developing for Mary, the former colleague who had texted out of the blue one day to suggest getting together for cocktails. They stayed at the bar for hours, well past when Lily had told Bill she'd be home. She just couldn't tear herself away. When they did finally part, Lily thought she felt something in the way Mary hugged her, like her old friend had held on for just a second too long. She replayed the evening in her head several times over the next few days, before texting Mary to see if she'd like to get together again, and from that point on they saw each other at least weekly, maybe more. One night, about 3 months after that first outing, Mary and Lily were sitting on the floor of Lily's living room, talking about some friends they had in common from their old company. Charlie was out at a party and Bill was away for business. Lily was half a bottle of wine in and couldn't take her eyes off of Mary, who was telling a story about how their former boss had accidentally locked himself inside a bathroom while visiting a client in Tokyo and later swore her to secrecy. Lily loved the way Mary threw her head back, her platinum-colored bob swinging back with her, revealing a beautiful neck and cute little ears. She began to laugh along with her friend, hoping that by doing so she'd get Mary to keep laughing, just so Lily could keep watching her laugh. But then suddenly Mary was not laughing. She was looking at Lily quietly, almost studying her. "You okay?" Lily asked, feeling self-conscious. "Fine," Mary said. "Maybe better than fine. Oh, I hope I'm not reading too much into this. And if I am, I'll never say another word about it and we can keep hanging out, or if you never want to see me again I'd understand, but I think I'm falling in love with you," Lily blurted out. She hadn't even really realized it until the words were already coming out of her mouth, but she knew at that moment she meant them. Mary seemed to be caught off guard, but quickly recovered. "So I'm not reading too much into this. Us. No." And then suddenly it was Lily who was turning serious. "But it's not like I can do anything about it. I'm married. I'm not going to just cheat on Bill. And what about Charlie?" Mary nodded. "I understand this is a delicate situation. But I truly believe we can have a happy life together. Charlie heads off to college in a few months, right? And then it will just be you and Bill while Charlie's away. Can you imagine yourself happily empty nesting with Bill?" Lily shook her head. "I think it's been a while since I was happy with Bill." This, too, was something she hadn't entirely realized until she spoke the words out loud. "You deserve happiness, Lily. I know. Still, I'm not a cheater. And I don't want to ruin Charlie's last summer at home." Mary looked crestfallen. "I see. It isn't a no, Mary. It's a not yet. Think maybe you can wait for me until September." Mary's eyes were suddenly bright once more. "For you, I'd even wait till October," she teased. The weekend after they dropped Charlie off at college, Lily and Bill were sitting in their living room discussing some home improvement projects they needed to do. Lily tried to care about Bill's musings regarding whether they should have the deck redone with wood, so the house would still feel like it did when they bought it, or with composite, which would be more durable but also, as Bill put it, not like what we're used to. Bill, she finally interrupted, grabbing the hair at her temples and pulling it slightly up and out, as she often did when she was feeling exasperated. Bill, I don't care about the deck. She let go of her hair, which fell back into place, glossy and dark and hanging halfway down her back. Bill looked at her, clearly annoyed by the outburst, but he didn't say anything. I want a divorce. That got Bill talking again. For the next 2 hours, he talked more to Lily than to her about all the reasons she couldn't possibly be serious. His logic ran from the pragmatic, but you're on my insurance plan, to the absolutely absurd, how do we decide who gets to keep our friends, but mostly drifted toward the sentimental. He kept reminding Lily of all the good times, like early in their relationship when they had gone on a weekend camping trip with their friends and it was the first time they said I love you to each other, or when they went to Italy and for some reason decided it would be fun to convince everyone they were related to the Prime Minister of Canada, or when they got married and his dad gave that beautiful speech about how they'd be together forever, and then his dad died less than a year later and their wedding was one of his last memories of his father. It was clear Bill was grasping at straws, trying to find anything that would work, but Lily had never been as sentimental as he was. Besides, she was ready to start making new memories with Mary. She was not swayed. But what about Charlie? He finally croaked, slumping to a chair, his head resting in his hands. Charlie is 18 now, Lily said. This isn't about Charlie. It's about me. My mind is made up. She headed for the bedroom and packed an overnight bag for herself, then returned to the living room, where Bill was positioned as she left him. I'm going to stay somewhere else tonight. Give you some space. I'll come back tomorrow while you're at work and grab more stuff, and maybe we can find some time in the next few days to start figuring out where we go from here. And with another word or look at Bill, she walked out the front door, got in her car, and headed straight to Mary's. It would be the first time they kissed, the first time they made love. Lying there in the afterglow, her head resting on Mary's chest as Mary wove her fingers through Lily's thick, long hair, Lily knew she'd done the right thing. The next few months were tough. Telling Charlie about the divorce had gone smoothly enough, but Bill was now insufferable. Or, Lily wondered, had he always been like this? At least once a day, he'd call or send a text because something made him think of Lily. A new song he'd just heard. A funny video his sister had forwarded him. He'd occasionally send her gifts, mostly small trinkets, but occasionally something more significant. One day a wrapped box landed on Lily's desk at work. It was delivered to her by the receptionist, who had just been handed the box by a courier. Lily waited until the receptionist walked away and then opened the gift. A small note was taped to the lid, in Bill's unmistakable scrawl, "Saw these and thought of you. Always and forever, B." Inside was a pair of diamond earrings, similar in style to the ones Bill had given her after Charlie was born but significantly bigger. She turned Bill's note over, and wrote one word on it. Stop. She then put the note and the earrings, still in their box, into a padded envelope she found in the copy room, scrawled Bill's office address on it, and brought the package back to the receptionist. Can you please get this couriered to my husband? She had not yet told all of her colleagues about her impending divorce. But there was so much good during those months, too. She had more or less moved into Mary's condo, and the two women were free to explore their feelings for each other in the way that they had both so wanted to in the months before Lily left Bill. They were keeping their romantic relationship on the down low until the divorce was final. Until then, nobody who knew about the split batted an eye at the idea that Lily would be staying with an old friend for a few months while she figured out what was coming next. Still, both women knew it was about way more than staying with a friend, and Lily was so grateful to have Mary there on the day Bill would pull another ridiculous stunt in order to win her back. In spite of everything, she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this happy. It was Saturday. Later that afternoon, per the agreement reached by Marjorie and Bill's attorney, Jerry, Lily, and both lawyers would meet Bill at the old house, and the soon-to-be ex-spouses would take turns laying claim to items in the house they could both plausibly claim as theirs. Mary would join for moral support. Getting ready to leave the condo, Mary came up behind Lily, throwing her arms around her lover's waist and nuzzling into her hair, inhaling the scent of her shampoo. I can't wait till I can do this in public. What? Sniff my head. Lily tried to sound casual, but it was clear she was anxious. The night before, Bill had sent her a text saying he couldn't wait to see her and it had put her on her guard. No, silly. I mean be affectionate with you, openly. But now that you mention it, do you want me to brush your hair before we go? Lily nodded and sat on the edge of Mary's bed while Mary knelt on the mattress behind her and began to gently brush through Lily's chestnut-colored tresses until they shone, occasionally moving a lock this way or that to kiss Lily's neck, or behind her ear. This had become a ritual for them, the hair brushing, something Mary would do because she knew it relaxed Lily, and something Lily would let Mary do because she knew it excited Mary. All too soon, it was time to leave. Lily had tried to spend as little time as possible at the old house since she had walked out on Bill that day. She went back about once a week, always when she could be sure Bill wouldn't be home, to get some more of her stuff, mostly clothes and books and a few other small items she hoped Bill could not claim an attachment to. Mary's second bedroom was now piled with Lily's belongings. They had begun to talk about finding a bigger house. Lying in bed, with Mary running her fingers through Lily's long hair, they would make plans for the rest of their lives together. The divorce could be finalized as soon as Monday, and then Lily could get on with her new life with Mary, openly loving her, instead of keeping her feelings private. They still had not told anyone of their relationship. Lily was worried Bill might try to use it against her in the divorce proceedings. Not that there was much reason for him to make her look bad, she had asked for very little from him in the settlement. Still, given his antics over the last few months, she wouldn't have put it past him to use any excuse he could if it meant he was still, technically, married to Lily. Both Lily and Bill had been asked to make a list of items from the home they knew they'd each want, and to share it with each other through their lawyers. Anything that only one person wanted would go to that person, anything they both wanted would be pulled aside for them to take turns picking, as if they were choosing kickball teams, rather than personal belongings, except that either of them could object to the claim and, if necessary, the lawyers could step in to negotiate. Anything still unclaimed in the house after that, the things neither of them had thought to put on their initial lists, would be subject to a rapid-fire version of the same exercise. One person could claim an item, the other could agree or object, and if they couldn't compromise, the lawyers would step in. Lily looked over at Mary as the lawyers re-explained the rules, absent-mindedly stroking her long hair. Mary shot her a quick thumbs up and mouthed the words, "You've got this." And then it was time to begin dividing up the last of Lily and Bill's marital property. Several items on both of their original lists were uncontested and divvied up easily enough. But, as Lily had feared, on the items they both claimed, Bill had lengthy sentimental reasons for his claims. Rather than fighting him or forcing the lawyers to intervene, she mostly let him get what he wanted. Anything to speed the process along and leave this house once and for all. It was mostly just stuff anyway. That was, at least, until the subject of Charlie's baby blanket came up. Lily had spent hours during her pregnancy crocheting the yellow and gray wool every night after dinner. If anything, the blanket belonged to Charlie, but he understandably had chosen to leave it at home when he went to college. Lily believed that, as the blanket's maker and also the person who carried Charlie inside her body while she was making it, she should at least get to hang on to the blanket until Charlie decided he wanted it back, if he ever did. Bill saw things differently. He was the one who'd run back to the house to get the blanket while Lily was in labor, when she realized she hadn't packed it to come to the hospital with them. He was the one who spent hours using the blanket for peekaboo with Charlie while Lily, freshly back to work after her maternity leave, took late evening phone calls with overseas clients. He might not have made the blanket, he explained, but for him it was an essential part of his life. It helped define him as a father. Marjorie and Jerry, the attorneys, looked knowingly at each other. This was not their first time they had faced off as adversaries in a divorce case, and almost every time, something like this would come up, threatening to derail the whole process. After listening to Lily and Bill squabble for a few moments longer, Marjorie stepped forward. "One of you is going to have to compromise here, or else Jerry and I will have to adjudicate this. And I'll remind you both that you pay us by the hour." Lily and Bill stared at each other, each wondering whether the other would break first. "Okay, fine," Bill finally said. "You can have the blanket under two conditions. One is that if Charlie ever asks for it back, you return it to him immediately, no questions asked. The other is that I get to pull my first draft pick from the stuff neither of us initially claimed right now, even though we're not technically into that part of the proceedings yet. And if you fight me on this, not only do you not get the blanket, but we put an immediate stop to these proceedings and send our lawyers back to the drawing board." "Yeah, Okay, sure, Lily said. What were you gonna pick? The wedding china? The teak bench we bought in Thailand? Bill looked Lily dead in the eye. Your hair. Lily blinked. She wasn't sure she'd heard him correctly. My what? Your hair. He was grinning now. It was clear he'd planned this and had been waiting for his chance to strike. Remember how when you were in grad school and we'd just gotten engaged, you would go to cosmetology school to get your hair done because you didn't want to spend a lot of money on it? And then one time they talked you into a perm and you came home in tears, looking like Slash? And I told you I'd pay to have it fixed at a real salon, and I'd continue to pay for your hair as long as you wanted, if it meant you'd never go to the beauty school again? And how all these years later, even after you finished school and had a good job and could easily have afforded the hair appointments out of your own money, I just kept paying for your salon visits? Yeah, I know you remember that perm. I know you never had to pull your wallet out at a salon again. Even after you started going to that posh, expensive place downtown a few years ago, I kept paying. I did it gladly. I just loved when you'd come home, looking all fresh, showing your hair off to me. And then we'd fuck and you would wrap your hair around my Bill. Jerry cut him off, looking extremely uncomfortable. It was clear his client had not let him in on his intentions. I've been investing in your hair for more than 20 years, and I'll be damned if I let someone else enjoy my dividends. This is absurd, Marjorie interrupted. She had been concerned Bill might try to pull something, but never in a million years would she have come up with this. Hair isn't personal property. It's literally attached to her head. Shocked and angry as she was, Lily was grateful for Bill's heel turn. Knowing he was capable of such selfishness further reinforced her conviction that she was doing the right thing in divorcing him. This marriage needed to be officially over, and she was willing to do whatever it would take to remove Bill from her daily life. She did not break eye contact with Bill. How much hair? All of it. Beside her, Lily heard a stifled gasp coming from Mary, who Bill now acknowledged for the first time. He leveled his gaze at the blonde. What's the matter, Mary? You should thank me. Now it will be clearer to everyone which of you is the man in your relationship. Now it was Lily who gasped, in anger at the words he chose and in surprise at what he had revealed. They'd been so careful. How did he know? Bill turned to his imminently to-be ex-wife. Remember my friend Carmen from work? She saw you two getting mighty cozy at a girl bar last month. I hired a private detective to follow you around and he confirmed you're not just temporarily staying at Mary's place. Are you okay? First of all, you didn't have to get that homophobic dig in there. That was below the belt. But also I never meant to hurt you, Bill. We didn't do anything until after I left. I promise. Well, technically, until we sign those papers, we're still married. So whatever this is, he waved his hands vaguely between Lily and Mary, is still infidelity in my book. He looked so proud of himself. Lily couldn't believe she had never truly noticed this side of Bill before. He wasn't sentimental, he just used sentimentality to mask his need for control. He was still talking. I tried to be nice. I sent you beautiful presents, which you rejected. I'd text you a link to a song I thought you'd like, and you never even thanked me. I told you if you just came back to me, I'd forget the whole thing ever happened. And you ignored me. Now I understand why, and it's payback time. So you choose your hair now, or I refuse to sign any paperwork and I just extend this thing until I've completely bled you dry. If you go forward with this, Bill, you'll have to do it with another lawyer, Jerry said from behind his client. Bye Jerry, Bill responded without turning to look at him. But the attorney seemed frozen in place, as if he were obligated to see at least today's proceedings through. Let's go, Marjorie said, taking her client by the arm. We're done here. No, Lily shook her off. If this is what it's going to take to move on with my life, I'll do it. She looked at Bill. Please believe I will be telling our son exactly why his mother is bald when he comes home for fall break. And also I do not want to see your face again until his graduation if he even wants you there, after I tell him about this. And then even if he does want you at graduation, I don't want to see you again until his wedding. And after that, hopefully not until your funeral. Bill stared back at Lily impassively, unwilling to accept her terms out loud but knowing it would be worth possibly never seeing her again to see her suffer through this now. Then, Lily turned to Mary. You'll still love me at the end of this, right? With tears in her eyes, Mary approached Lily and smoothed her lover's long brown hair. Slowly, savoring it for the last time for who knows how long. It's you I love, not your hair. Lily tousled Mary's white blonde bob, which settled immediately back into place just below her chin. I guess you'll be the long-haired one for a while now, huh? She leaned in to kiss away one of Mary's tears, and then straightened herself, turning back to the man who she had very lately come to despise. So how are we doing this? Funny you should ask. Bill reached into the cabinet beside him and produced a hairbrush, a large set of electric clippers, and a few hair ties. I will be your barber tonight. I've been watching a lot of videos in preparation for this. He was positively giddy, and so proud of himself. Don't worry, I've decided to be generous and leave you with some hair on your head. Depending on how you look at it. He pulled a footstool in front of him, and Lily dutifully approached and sat down. Jerry, are you seriously not stopping your client? Marjorie hissed at the other lawyer. I'm not his client anymore, Marjorie. Remember? Bill sneered in her direction as he began to slowly brush Lily's hair, occasionally sniffing it loudly so everyone in the room knew he was enjoying its scent. With each stroke of the hairbrush, he allowed himself another memory of their happier times. He had brushed her shiny brown hair so many times over the years and at so many different lengths, but this was his favorite, thick and long, longer than she'd worn it for many years. Bill knew this would be the last time he would ever brush Lily's hair at this length or at any length at all, at least while the hair was still attached to her head. He wasn't entirely sure what he'd be doing with Lily's hair once it was officially his, but he knew for certain that he wouldn't be throwing it away. Bill, Lily snapped, pulling him out of his reverie. Can you please get on with it? I'm letting you have my hair, but I still own my time. Bill signed in obvious annoyance. Fine. Just one last thing. He darted briefly into the other room and re-emerged with a tripod and a ring light. For posterity, he sneered. After a few moments, his phone was mounted to the tripod and recording video, and the light was perfectly positioned to make Lily's hair shine. Not just brown, but threads of copper and gold in this light. Across the room, Mary noticed how beautiful Lily looked and began to cry again. Bill picked up his brush again and began to gather Lily's hair in a single ponytail near the top of her head. He secured it loosely, in the hopes that he would be able to slide his clippers under and around it, pulling the whole thing off in one piece. After placing a few more elastic bands along the length of the ponytail, Bill picked up his clippers and held them in front of Lily as he placed a small guard on them. Lily would later learn it was the number one saying, "This is what's going to ensure you still have hair on your head when I'm done." Technically. He turned the machine on with a loud pop. It seemed as if every corner of the room was filled with the buzzing sound that followed. Chin down, Bill ordered. Then, holding tightly onto Lily's ponytail with one hand and placing the clippers at her nape in the other, he moved the machine upward toward Lily's occipital lobe. Already, he could feel the ponytail beginning to give. Lily could feel it, too, the slight release of tension where Bill was holding her ponytail. He returned his clippers to her nape and made a second pass. With this pass, not only did he feel the ponytail give a bit more, but he also began to notice Lily's scalp emerging, covered in the shortest fuzz as the hair being severed from her head was lifted away. By the time he finished running the clippers up the back of her head, a clear expanse of milky white skin was exposed to the world for the first time, just barely camouflaged by the gray-studded brown stubble he was leaving behind. Bill began to work the area around Lily's right ear next. It was obvious now to the three observers in the room just how much damage he was doing with the humming device in his hand. A few longer hairs that had clearly escaped from the ponytail were still attached to Lily's head. Never mind, Bill told himself. He'd get them on his second pass. Or maybe he'd make Mary finish the job for him. Lily sat serenely as years' worth of care and growth were separated from her head in mere seconds. She should be upset, she knew. She loved her hair. Mary loved her hair. But then so did Bill, so perhaps this is what needed to happen. A complete purging of the past. Suddenly she felt a gust of air on the right side of her skull. She had never felt anything like it before. She looked to Mary and shot her a reassuring smile. Mary was staring, transfixed, her eyes still filled with tears, as the angry blade sliced through her lover's strands like a hot knife through butter. Bill paused for a moment, as if to decide whether to attack Lily's forehead first, or go for her other temple, ultimately deciding on the latter. Working from back to front, he peeled more and more of Lily's long, thick strands away from her skull. She could now feel the breeze on this side of her scalp, 2. It must have been coming from the air conditioner, she realized, and it seemed as though barely anything could still be attached to her head, what with so much flesh now exposed. Still, she could still feel tension at her forehead and crown, perhaps even more tension than she had felt before, because the bulk of her hair was now weighing down what was left hanging from her head. Once the left side of Lily's head more or less matched the right, Bill came to stand in front of her, one hand still holding her ponytail aloft and the other holding the buzzing clippers, and stooped to look her in the eye, ready to say goodbye. Though awkwardly positioned, he stayed here, looking Lily in the eye, as he brought the clippers to the center of her hairline and pushed them back toward what remained of the ponytail. Lily knew he was waiting for her to flinch. She did not give him the satisfaction, even though her stomach was doing backflips, and across the room she could see Mary staring at her in not a little horror. Bill grunted and stood back up, taking a moment to admire the clean path of stubble running across the top of Lily's head. He didn't have much more left to do. He decided to slow down and enjoy it. He began to move the clippers along the top of Lily's head in short strokes instead of long passes, in much the same rhythm one would use when sweeping their floor. Inch by inch, more and more of Lily's scalp was exposed on the top of her head, until, finally, the only hair left attached to her head was right under the center of the ponytail. Bill slid the teeth of the clippers into this area and moved them forward and back, side to side, until at last, Lily's ponytail came off in one piece. He held it triumphantly aloft and smiled into his camera. Then he looked back at Lily, or, more specifically, at her denuded head. He saw the few long hairs he had missed earlier and a couple of stragglers beyond those. "Oh Mary," he summoned her with mock sweetness. "It looks like I missed a few spots here. You can't have your girlfriend going out in public like this. Want to come clean her up?" Mary stood and approached Lily, then took the clippers out of Bill's hands, looking at him with such contempt that he might have been a cockroach. She put one hand on top of Lily's head, surprised by how soft her hair still was, what little of it remained, anyway. She wasn't sure over the sound of the clippers, but Mary thought she might have heard Lily let out a little moan at her touch. Slowly, plaintively, Mary ran her hand over Lily's head, feeling for anything that seemed uneven and using the clippers to mow down whatever didn't feel right. For the longer strands, mostly around Lily's neck, Mary took extra care to make sure everything was buzzed down to a uniform length. She hated this, she hated it so much, but the damage was done. All she could do was make sure it was done well. Finally, for good measure, Mary ran the clippers all over Lily's head one last time to reassure herself she hadn't missed anything. Then she turned the clippers off and circled around to stand in front of her lover, squatting slightly to look her in the eye. "You're beautiful," she said. She meant it. "Shall we go?" Offering her hand to Lily, Mary helped pull her off the footstool. And, without a word to anyone, the two headed toward the front door. Marjorie trotted a few feet after them, picking up the box of items Lily had drafted that day, Charlie's baby blanket carefully placed on top. Several items Lily might have once wanted still lay inside the house. She no longer cared. Out in the front yard of the house she called home for nearly 20 of the 25 years she had spent with Bill, Lily turned her face to the sky and stretched her arms at her side. The sun was still high, and she felt it beating down on her face. For the first time all day, she was crying. Mary rushed to her side. "Oh no, baby, don't cry. You look beautiful. You really do. I wasn't just saying that." Lily looked at her lover, her platinum hair shimmering in the sunlight. "I'm not crying about my hair, although I might when I finally look in a mirror. I'm crying because I feel liberated. I don't have to see Bill again for a long, long time." Almost as if on cue, Jerry came running out of the front door, a stack of papers in his hand. Bill signed the divorce papers.